Tell the truth or watch it leak through the cracks you swore were sealed. Chosen ones, lean in, because what I'm about to uncover will send chills through you. Imagine this. In a recent psychological study, researchers found that people caught in a lie often spend more energy managing the lie than they would have spent telling the truth. And when that house of cards starts wobbling, they panic, they scramble, they beg. That's exactly what's happening now. The very same people who swore you were the villain, who painted you as some lurking threat, are now chasing down one person, pleading with them to tell the world you never tried to hurt anyone. Let that sink in. The story they built to destroy you is now the same story suffocating them. It's almost comical, isn't it? They worked overtime to make you look dangerous, only to end up looking desperate. It's like watching someone set a trap, trip on it themselves, and then scream for help. And the irony? They want the very truth they once buried to come rushing out. Because without it, they're finished. So tonight, we're peeling back the layers. We're going to expose why their begging isn't about your freedom. It's about their survival. And trust me, once you see the psychology, the shame, and the spiritual weight behind it, you'll never look at their cries the same way again. And number one, they're begging for a witness because their own conscience betrayed them. They're begging for a witness because their own conscience has already betrayed them. That's the truth no one wants to say out loud. A guilty conscience is heavier than chains, and it always slips through no matter how hard someone tries to hide it. The reason they want someone else to step forward and declare your innocence is not out of justice or compassion. It's because their soul won't let them sleep at night. They know what they did to you. They know the stories they told never lined up with who you really are. And now, every time your name comes up, they feel the sting of their own dishonesty pressing against them. What they really want is a bandage for the wound they created themselves. If this person they're begging finally speaks, it relieves them of the burden of carrying the lie. In their minds, it's not about doing right by you. It's about lightening the load they can't carry anymore. The irony is the conscience never forgets. They thought they were strong enough to hold a lie, but lies aren't still objects. They grow, they multiply, they demand maintenance. And eventually the maintenance becomes unbearable. That's the stage they're in right now. Another layer to this is fear of exposure. When someone begs for a witness, it's because they're terrified the truth will burst out on its own in ways they can't control. So they attempt damage control. If this witness says you never tried to hurt anyone, they can spin it as though they always knew you were innocent, as if they weren't the ones pushing the opposite story in the first place. It's a survival tactic, not redemption. They're trying to rewrite their role before the script catches up to them, and here's the cutting edge of it. Begging proves weakness, not righteousness. If they truly believed their own accusations about you, they wouldn't need anyone to defend you now. But the fact they're desperate for someone else to clear your name shows they never believed in their lies fully. They just hoped everyone else would. Now their conscience has turned into a traitor, screaming the truth in ways they can't silence. And the only escape they see is forcing someone else to say what they themselves are too ashamed to admit. The begging isn't really for your freedom, it's for theirs. Number two, the begging proves they're afraid of collective memory. They're afraid of collective memory, and that's why they're begging. Rumors are fragile. They may sting in the moment, but over time people forget the words. What doesn't fade, though, is energy. The way someone's presence makes you feel, the quiet consistency of their character, the atmosphere they carry with them. Long after the stories about you were whispered in dark corners, people remembered the feeling you left behind, and that memory never matched the lies. That's the problem they're facing now. They can't erase what people's spirits already know. When someone is truly harmful, it shows in more than just rumors. It shows in a pattern of destruction, in a residue that follows them everywhere. But with you, the opposite has been true. People may not always have understood you, but they couldn't shake the sense that you weren't what you were accused of being. And over time, that sense grows louder than any smear campaign. This is what terrifies them. They know the human memory is fickle with details, but sharp with impressions. They know that sooner or later people begin to question, if you were really so dangerous, why didn't their own experiences with you ever match the narrative? This is why they need someone else to come out and declare your innocence. It's not because they suddenly care about fairness. It's because they realize the story they pushed is collapsing under the weight of lived memory. People are piecing things together, not with words, but with recollections. Moments of kindness, times you helped, the way you walked away instead of fighting back. That memory carries a louder truth than anything they could manufacture. And once people trust their own memory over the rumors, the game is over. They also fear what collective memory does when it flips. It doesn't just exonerate you, it condemns them. The same crowd that once believed the rumors begins to see them differently. They're no longer the protectors warning others about you. They're the deceivers who manipulated everyone into doubting what they already felt in their bones. That shift is irreversible. People may forgive mistakes, but they don't forgive being tricked into doubting their own instincts. So the begging isn't really about protecting your name. It's about shielding themselves from the backlash of memory. Because memory, once awakened, has no mercy. Number 3, they don't want redemption. They want insurance. They don't want redemption, they want insurance. That's the truth, hiding behind their sudden desperation. Redemption would mean they genuinely regret what they did, that they feel the weight of their actions, and that they're ready to own up without expecting anything in return. But that's not what's happening here. What they're chasing is a safety net. They want someone else to clear your name, not because they care about you, but because they're worried about what might happen to them if the truth surfaces without their control. This is how fear works. When people sense that consequences are approaching, they scramble to cover themselves. They don't confess because of conscience, they confess because of calculation. That's exactly what this begging is. They're not driven by love, empathy, or even fairness. They're driven by self-preservation. If they can get someone else to say you never tried to hurt anyone, then they can present themselves as people who were misled or confused instead of the very ones who lit the fire of falsehood in the first place. It's an attempt to shield their reputation before the storm hits. This proves something deeper about human behavior. Many people don't mind destroying others as long as they believe they'll never be held accountable. It's only when the walls start closing in that their tune changes. And that change isn't a moral awakening, it's a survival instinct. What they're begging for isn't justice, it's leverage. They want insurance that when people look back, the narrative doesn't paint them as villains, but as bystanders who eventually helped. The danger in this is subtle. It can trick outsiders into thinking these people finally turned a corner, when in reality, they're still manipulating the situation for their own benefit. The act of begging looks humble, but at its core, it's just another layer of control. They want to control how the truth comes out, who says it, and when it's revealed. So it cushions their fall instead of exposing them for what they really are. Their desperation is not about your healing or your vindication. It's about ensuring their names don't rot when the truth fully shines. They're not looking for redemption, they're bargaining for protection. And the very fact they're scrambling for that protection is proof they know exactly what they did. Number 4, their lies couldn't outlive your reality. Their lies couldn't outlive your reality. For years, they treated the lie like a product to be marketed, repeated it until familiarity dulled skepticism, nudged conversations, seeded doubt, and watched the rumor circulate like a cheap rumor brand. They believed if enough people heard the story often enough, the story would become the only thing people remembered. That's the gamble of a smear campaign. You count on repetition to smother contradiction. Reality, however, is stubborn in ways lies never are. Reality is shown in small, consistent truths that keep stacking up until they outweigh 1,000 manufactured sentences. It shows in patterns, the times you walked away instead of striking back, the ways people's interactions with you left them quietly unsettled by the mismatch between rumor and experience, the ordinary gestures that don't look like preparation for harm. Those little repeatable truths gather weight without anyone trying to make them viral. They don't need press releases, they only need to be true. When a living reality grows heavy enough, it starts to press on the false story until the paper tears. The person they are now begging holds the power to make that tear visible. Their testimony won't invent the truth. People already feel it in their bones, but it will give voice to what many have sensed privately. That single confirmation is what topples the charade. It changes conversations, shifts allegiances, and removes the plausible deniability the liars used for cover. Suddenly, the smear doesn't look like protection anymore. It looks like construction of a lie. This moment is terrifying for those who built the lie. Their whole strategy hinged on the lie outliving the subtle realities that contradicted it. They counted on forgetfulness and noise. They didn't plan for endurance of character, consistency of behavior, or the slow, relentless accumulation of witnesses. Their panic now reveals the math they misread. You can only deceive a community for so long before everyday truth starts to add up, and the sums don't lie. The psychological fallout is ugly. People who propagated the false story scramble to backpedal, to delegate the confession, to find someone else's voice to soften the blow. That scramble confirms what the truth already said quietly. The lie was a construction, not a conviction. Your reality didn't need to shout to win. It only needed to outlast the noise. And when it does, the people who thought repetition could replace truth are left exposed, desperate, and diminished. Number 5, fear made them play judge, but truth made them defendants. They played judge because fear dressed itself up as righteousness, and for a long time that costume worked. They stood at the center of conversations, nodding with authority, turning accusations into verdicts without trial. Whisper by whisper, they shaped a courtroom where they were both judge and jury, and the public was trained to accept their rulings as if truth had been announced from on high. That posture gave them power. People deferred, reputations fell, and the narrative bent to their advantage. They liked the control of it, the ability to name you dangerous and watch others step back. It felt safe to decide someone's fate when no one was asking them to account for the evidence they never actually had. Then truth started doing its slow, stubborn work. It doesn't always explode into headlines. More often it arrives as small corrections, an odd inconsistency in a tale, a forgotten kindness remembered, a timeline that doesn't hold up. Those corrections accumulate, and the more they accumulate, the less convincing the judge's confident tone becomes. When enough people begin to notice that the judicial robe was paper thin, the courtroom flips. The very ones who pronounced guilt find themselves under the microscope. Their accusations that once silenced others now draw attention to their own motives and actions. The posture that protected them becomes the evidence against them. Their reaction is frantic and revealing. Instead of standing up and saying, "I was wrong," they search for someone else to clear your name so they can avoid the hard work of facing what they did. Pleading for a third-party witness is an attempt to erase their fingerprints from the story. It's an attempt to keep authority without taking responsibility. That desperation betrays what they feared all along, that their power came from fear, not truth. Once the crowd stops accepting their verdicts at face value, those who made the accusations lose more than reputation. They lose the safety net that let them speak without consequence. The reversal is clean and brutal. Accusers become defendants in the court of public memory, and their earlier certainty looks like arrogance rather than conviction. The power they wielded turns into the thing that condemns them, because it exposes the mechanism of manipulation. In the end, truth doesn't arrest anyone with pomp. It simply reassigns roles, exposing the judges as the accused and turning the loudest voices into the quietest witnesses of their own undoing. Number 6, they're afraid of being seen as cowards who hunted innocence. They're terrified of being remembered as cowards who hunted innocence. And that fear runs deeper than any embarrassment over being caught in a lie. A lie can sometimes be explained away. People can claim they were misinformed, pressured, or confused. But cowardice? That leaves a permanent stain because it shows character, or the lack of it. When you attack someone who never raised a hand against you, you reveal a kind of weakness that no excuse can cover. It isn't about a misunderstanding. It's about the ugliness of choosing the easiest target and calling it courage. This is why their shame has begun to eat them alive. To others, they may have once looked powerful, bold, or righteous for standing against you, but now the illusion is cracking, and what's being exposed is far less flattering. They didn't fight an enemy. They ambushed someone who was never fighting them to begin with. That's not bravery. It's the lowest form of fear. They thought strength was measured in how loudly they could accuse, but history doesn't honor noise, it honors truth. And the truth is, their so-called strength was nothing more than an attack on someone defenseless. History has always been cruel to cowardice. People can respect a villain who stood firm in their beliefs, no matter how twisted, more than they can respect a coward who attacks the innocent to save their own skin. Why? Because cowardice strips away dignity. It shows that the person never believed in justice, never believed in truth. They only believed in protecting themselves. That memory lingers far longer than the lie they told. And this is exactly what they're afraid of now, being remembered not just as liars, but as people who preyed on someone harmless and called it protection. That kind of shame doesn't fade with time, it compounds. Cowards are mocked, exposed, and left behind because nobody wants to be associated with those who tried to destroy what was harmless. This is why they beg, why they scramble, why they want someone else to come forward and soften the story. It's not just about clearing your name, it's about protecting theirs from being locked forever in the category of cowardice. But the truth has already done its work. Their legacy is not of bravery, not of righteousness, but of fragile fear masquerading as strength. And once the mask falls, dignity never returns. Number 7. This confession demand isn't about you, it's about their survival. This confession demand was never really about you, it's about their survival. On the surface, it looks like a push for fairness, like they suddenly care about setting the record straight. But dig deeper, and you'll see what's really driving them. Panic. They know that if the story goes down in history without correction, they won't just be remembered as people who made a mistake. They'll be remembered as oppressors who crushed someone harmless. That's the kind of stain that doesn't wash off, no matter how many apologies come later. Legacy is what they're scrambling to protect. People can live with being disliked, but they can't stomach the idea of being remembered as cruel to the innocent. That label follows them past reputation into history, past gossip into the kind of memory that lingers for generations. Once people start connecting the dots, that you never raised a hand, never tried to cause harm, and yet were painted as a threat, the story of your suffering becomes their indictment, and that's what terrifies them. It's not the lie itself that's crushing them. It's the possibility of being forever linked to it. That's why they want someone else to make the confession. If they admit it themselves, it looks like guilt. But if they can get someone else to declare your innocence, they can reposition themselves in the narrative. They can say, we were misled, or we didn't know the full truth. It's damage control, not repentance. It's an attempt to manage how they'll be remembered. They're not fighting for you to be seen as who you really are. They're fighting for themselves to avoid being seen as what they really became. And this reveals the difference between justice and survival. Justice doesn't care about optics. Justice owns the wrong, faces the weight, and restores the truth, no matter how ugly it makes the guilty look. Survival, on the other hand, is selfish. It scrambles for a softer narrative, for a way to escape the backlash while pretending to set things right. That's what this begging is. It's not a noble stand on your behalf. It's a frantic attempt to rewrite their legacy before it locks in place. In the end, the confession they seek isn't really about setting you free. You were never chained to their lies anyway. Truth always had your back. The confession is about saving themselves from being forever remembered as predators of innocence. And that fear says everything. Number 8, their desperation proves the lie was bigger than anyone knew. Their desperation proves the lie was bigger than anyone knew. What looks like frantic begging is actually the tip of a massive, well-oiled machine that spent months or years building a version of you designed to disappear. Small rumors fizzle because they're casual mistakes or petty gossip. This is different. The way they're scrambling now shows that the smear was not an accident or a heat-of-the-moment jab. It was constructed, coordinated, and intended to do permanent damage. People don't beg for a single careless whisper to be undone. They beg when the whole operation depends on keeping that whisper alive and amplified. When a campaign is systemic, it has layers. People who start the whisper, others who amplify it across social circles, a few who plant it in places that matter, and sometimes even quiet officials who nod along to give it credibility. Each layer adds momentum and makes the falsehood feel like a community truth. That's why the fall is so extreme now. The machinery that manufactured the lie relied on momentum and anonymity. Pull one lever and the whole thing trembles. So those who orchestrated it are now racing to recruit a witness who can reverse the momentum before it exposes all the hands that pushed it forward. Their panic reveals the scale. There's also intentionality in the way the smear targeted you. A system aims to bury rather than merely harm. It didn't just spread a negative story, it aimed to isolate you, to erase your support, to make you unhireable, unwelcome, untrustworthy. They planned for consequences, not conversation. That's why their cries for a single confession are so telling. They're trying to buy back the narrative with a narrow intervention, hoping one voice can counteract 1,000 manufactured echoes. That hope is a confession in itself. They know the original construction was powerful, and they now fear it backfiring in ways they cannot control. This kind of organized harm leaves a particular kind of damage in its wake. It fractures relationships, forces people to choose sides, and creates ripples that last far longer than the initial lies. The desperation to recruit a defender is an attempt to pretend the infrastructure never existed, to make the erasure look like a misunderstanding rather than a campaign. But panic doesn't erase the architecture. When people finally look, they see patterns, timelines, and coordinated voices that point back to planning. Their begging is the moment the planners realize the scaffolding is visible, and they must either confess or be dismantled. The intensity of their scramble is proof enough. This was never a rumor. It was a plan. Number 9. They're trying to rewrite the story before judgment writes it for them. They are rewriting the story because they can see the final chapter closing, and they are terrified of how they will be remembered. For a long time, they controlled the narrative, planting lines, nudging conversations, and making their version of events the comfortable default. That control let them move through rooms with their reputation intact, pretending their actions were moral or necessary. Now that control is slipping and their energy goes purely toward damage control rather than truth. Every apology offered, every public statement crafted, and every desperate phone call made is calculated to soften how the record will read once the dust settles. It's not repentance. It's crisis management dressed up as conscience. Rewriting a story is an act of preservation. If their names remain tied to the campaign that destroyed someone who never deserved it, they will carry that stain far beyond the moment. People do not forget the ways a community was manipulated, and generations remember patterns more than single events. They are trying to engineer a new memory where they look like confused bystanders or reluctant participants instead of architects of harm. That effort is visible in the language they choose. Vague acknowledgements, selective admissions, and carefully timed confessions that aim to deflect attention from the broader pattern of orchestration. Each move is about creating plausible deniability that holds up long enough for public attention to move on. What makes this dangerous is how neat and persuasive the rewrite can be when it's handled by people who are practiced at shaping opinion. They will feed the new version to those who still trust them. They will push the narrative into quiet corners where it feels safe. And they will rely on the natural human tendency to prefer a resolution over continued conflict. The effort is a tactical attempt to soften consequences rather than to repair the damage done. It substitutes optics for accountability and narrative management for atonement. People who survive this kind of manipulation do not simply get their reputations back. They change the ledger where the community records what happened. At the center of all this is fear, and that fear breeds cleverness. They no longer argue the facts openly because facts are turning against them. Instead, they invest in rearranging the memory around the facts so the final impression works in their favor. That scramble to rewrite history confirms what the truth has already shown. They were not the champions of justice they claimed to be. Their priority is their portrait in the history books, not the real lives they tried to break. The attempt to rewrite will make their fall all the more obvious when the work of clearing the record is done, because a manufactured apology always reveals more than it conceals. Number 10. They didn't expect you to survive long enough to be vindicated. They didn't expect you to survive long enough to be vindicated. Their whole playbook depended on your disappearance, on silence, on weariness, on isolation. They calculated that if they could fracture your support, drown you in accusations, and make living feel like a constant excavation of your dignity, you would eventually bow out. They assumed pain would erode your voice, that friends would drift away under pressure, that opportunities would vanish and leave you small and forgotten. That assumed timeline is why their current begging reads like genuine panic. They misjudged the human capacity to endure, and the shock of their miscalculation is now collapsing their confidence. Endurance doesn't look flashy. It looks stubborn and quiet. It looks like showing up day after day, speaking the truth when it matters, and living with integrity when no one is watching. Those small, consistent acts pile up into a presence that refuses to be erased. Over time, people who were only hearing the rumor begin to notice the mismatch between what was said about you and how you actually behaved. Those observations accumulate into suspicion, then into doubt, and finally into a movement toward the truth. That movement is what terrifies the architects of the smear. They planned for erosion, not resistance. They counted on you to break. When you didn't, their blueprint failed. Their frantic attempt to recruit a witness now is evidence that they are scrambling to patch a plan that was meant to be terminal but instead backfired. The begging betrays their belief that vindication would be slow, quiet, and impossible. So impossible they never prepared for the day when your name would be cleared. Their arrogance was in assuming that manufactured noise could outlast steady truth. The reality is the opposite. Manufactured noise burns bright and then fades, while steady truth builds ballast. Now that people are seeing the ballast, the lie begins to look thin and brittle, and those who created it are left trying to rewrite history with hurried confessions and coaxed witnesses. Their shock is audible in the urgency of their appeals. They are trying to buy time they no longer have. Survival by erasure was their strategy. Your survival by integrity is the counter-strategy that ruins theirs. Their begging is the admission they never expected you to hold on, and that admission strips them of the last vestige of their power. The very posture they used to intimidate others now exposes them as the ones who miscalculated. And that exposure is what finally clears your name. Number 11. They feared exposure more than they feared God. They feared exposure more than they feared God. Their actions reveal a calculation. The shame and consequences of being publicly unmasked outweighed any moral or spiritual accountability they might claim to have. If their remorse were genuine, it would be loud, visible, and immediate. Genuine remorse strips away defenses. It brings confession without theatrics. What we see instead is a shadow campaign, secret calls, private coaxing, and frantic attempts to recruit a witness who will speak for them. That pattern doesn't look like repentance. It looks like terror. Terror stains everything they do now. They avoid the light because the light shows details they can't erase. The way timelines conflict, the names that keep reappearing, the gaps that only make sense if someone was orchestrating a narrative. Exposure would force them to confront not just a single lie, but the whole architecture that kept that lie alive. There's a difference between admitting a mistake and having to explain the plan that created the mistake. They aren't prepared for that explanation, so they bargain for a softer landing. Their begging is a form of damage control aimed at preventing the kind of public accounting that would reveal motives, meetings, and methods. Their behavior also shows cowardice dressed as caution. They hide behind intermediaries because facing the truth would require transparency and ownership, things they prefer to avoid. Press conferences, full statements, names and dates, those are the tools of accountability, and they refuse them. Instead, they hope to outsource their confession to get someone else's credibility to do the heavy lifting. That's not humility. It's an attempt to launder their reputation without ever admitting how dirty it's become. They fear being called to answer, not only for what they said about you, but for why they felt safe saying it in the first place. The deeper consequence of fearing exposure is moral corrosion. When exposure terrifies more than conscience, ethics become negotiable. Decisions get made on the basis of survival rather than rightness. Small compromises become a pattern, and each compromise makes the next one easier. What starts as a convenient lie becomes a system of avoidance that eventually consumes any impulse toward true accountability. In the end, their secret begging is a confession in itself. They know the truth's footprints are everywhere, and they're terrified those prints lead straight back to them. Their fear of being seen has become more powerful than any fear of judgment from higher moral sources. That priority reveals what they value most. Not redemption, not repair, but the maintenance of a name. And that alone tells you everything about what they were willing to do to protect it. Number 12. They're fighting not to lose control of the narrative. They are fighting not to lose control of the narrative because narrative equals power, and power is the currency they built their comfort on. For a long time, they curated the story about you with precision, which details to leak, which voices to amplify, and which doubts to plant. That curated story let them move through rooms unchallenged, maintain influence, and avoid accountability. Control of the narrative meant they could shape how people saw reality without ever answering for the reality they manufactured. Losing that control threatens everything they use to keep their reputations intact. When the truth begins to slip, it does more than correct a lie. It removes the scaffolding that held their influence up. People who once repeated their version of events start noticing holes, timelines stop matching up, and private conversations that once echoed the lie go quiet. The narrative fractures because lived experience doesn't match the script. That fracture creates momentum toward a new, more accurate story. One that exposes how the original narrative was crafted and by whom. That is precisely what terrifies them. The begging is a tactical move. Recruit a witness, stage a public statement, or plant a softer angle that can be fed back into the conversation. All of it is designed to reinsert their version of events before the alternative version gains enough traction to become the accepted truth. This struggle over narrative control is not abstract. It affects relationships, careers, and reputations. A single corrective testimony can shift alliances, reopen doors, and invalidate years of moral posturing. They understand that once people accept a different story, the social privileges they enjoyed because of the old one evaporate fast. That's why their actions now look so orchestrated. They are trying to engineer perception with the same care they used to build the lie, and that desperation exposes the lengths they'll go to avoid being unmasked. The more frantic their damage control, the clearer it becomes that their authority depended on silencing contradiction. Their attempts to reinstate the old narrative reveal the original sin. They used power to create a version of reality that served them. Now, as the narrative shifts, those who once sat comfortably under the shelter of that version are forced to reveal whether they were builders, accomplices, or beneficiaries. Losing control of the narrative doesn't just cost them face, it costs them the very structure that allowed them to act without consequence. Their begging is a last-ditch effort to keep that structure standing, even as every new truthful account brings it closer to collapse. Number 13, they know clearing your name condemns theirs. The moment someone admits you never tried to hurt anyone, it doesn't just clear your name, it flips the script into an indictment of them. That single admission removes the comfortable fog they used to hide behind and replaces it with a harsh light that shows motive, method, and consequence. It proves they didn't stumble into a mistake. They actively participated in a campaign meant to damage you. Once the community accepts that you were innocent, every action they took suddenly has a new meaning. Selective edits, anonymous tips, exaggerated whispers, conveniently timed concerns. Those things stop looking like caution and start looking like a coordinated effort to silence or erase you. What terrifies them is not only being labeled dishonest, it's being labeled deliberate. A mistake can be forgiven as an accident. A deliberate attack becomes part of a pattern that invites judgment, retribution, and exclusion. The confession of your innocence forces people to ask the obvious follow-up that the liars hoped would never be asked. Why did they do this? That question opens doors. It pulls at threads that reveal alliances, incentives, and the lengths they went to make the lie stick. Careers built on moral authority wobble. Relationships that relied on their perceived integrity fracture. Any position that depended on other people trusting their judgment gets re-evaluated in real time. Their fear also has practical teeth. Admitting you never tried to hurt anyone can trigger institutional responses. Internal probes, career consequences, legal reviews, especially when the smear had real-world damage. It can close doors they assumed would stay open and prompt others to distance themselves for self-preservation. People who once copied their chorus begin to record different verses. Networks that supported them quietly recalculate risk. That cascade can be swift and public, and in their mind it's catastrophic. They understand the mechanics. A single correction to the record can unravel reputations faster than 1,000 defenses. On a deeper level, owning up to your innocence forces them to face moral responsibility. It strips away excuses like, "we were misinformed" or "we acted in good faith." Those excuses collapse under a clear declaration because a confession from an authoritative witness undermines every mitigation they offered. The confession exposes choice, the decision to believe, amplify, and punish despite contrary evidence. That exposure is the core of their terror. Not the loss of comfort, but the loss of moral cover. So they try to suppress that confession, to buy it, to coax it, to turn it into something that minimizes their role. Their maneuvers prove the point. They're fighting to avoid being seen not merely as flawed, but as people who waged war on someone harmless. And that is the admission they dread most, because once it's made, there's no easy way to unring the bell. Number 14. Their plea reveals the real villain was never you. Their plea reveals the real villain was never you because desperation has a way of tearing the mask off. For years they tried to convince the world that you were a threat, a ticking bomb, someone who needed to be monitored, silenced, or cut off before you caused harm. They built an entire stage around that illusion, casting themselves as guardians of truth and protectors of the community. But the moment they started begging for someone to admit you never tried to hurt anyone, the illusion collapsed. That plea is not compassion, it's survival instinct. And in that survival instinct, they've accidentally confessed what they fought so hard to bury. The danger was never in you. It was always in them. A plea like that flips the whole narrative upside down. It shows that everything they projected onto you was a reflection of their own fear, envy, or malice. They weren't protecting others from you. They were protecting themselves from being exposed. By smearing you, they kept the spotlight off their own cracks, their own questionable actions, their own hunger for control. But the human spirit has a way of outlasting lies. And now, as truth becomes undeniable, they scramble to soften their role, to patch their image to appear less monstrous than their actions reveal. The very act of begging is an admission that their hands aren't clean. Their plea also unmasks the power dynamic. Villains rarely call themselves villains. They prefer the cloak of righteousness, pretending to act in the name of safety, tradition, or justice. But begging strips that facade. No one begs for mercy when they're in the right. No one pleads for protection if their record is spotless. Begging is the reflex of guilt. It's the quiet acknowledgement that exposure is coming, and when it does, the public will see clearly who was the predator and who was the prey. The irony is sharp. The same mouths that once demanded punishment for you now demand protection from judgment for themselves. That reversal exposes the truth in a way no speech of yours ever could. It shows that their campaign wasn't about safeguarding anyone. It was about silencing a soul they couldn't control. Their plea is the evidence. Their fear is the testimony. And their desperation is the final confession that all along the villainy never lived in you. It lived in them. In the end, the story isn't about the lies they told or the schemes they orchestrated. It's about the truth that refuses to be silenced. Every desperate plea, every attempt to rewrite history, every whispered effort to control perception has revealed one undeniable fact. You were never the threat. The danger they feared, the chaos they projected onto you was never inside your heart. It was always inside theirs. Their panic, their begging, their scramble to recruit witnesses are all confessions disguised as concern. Each act exposes their fear, their weakness, and their moral failure, while simultaneously elevating the reality of your integrity. The irony is exquisite. They built a house of falsehoods to cage you, only to find that your endurance, your consistency, and your truth have become the very instruments that unravel them. Every lie they spun, every rumor they nurtured, every shadow they hid behind, now illuminates the stark contrast between your reality and their fabrication. Their desperation proves that the story they tried to control is slipping beyond their grasp. History, collective memory, and human instinct are siding with what is real, not what was manufactured. And when someone finally steps forward to declare the truth, it isn't just a vindication of your character. It's the unveiling of the true architects of fear. You are the witness to their unraveling. The person they tried to destroy becomes the lens through which the world sees them clearly. Their cowardice, manipulation, and panic are now undeniable, while your resilience and truth stand unshaken. The begging, the behind-the-scenes maneuvering, the frantic attempts at damage control, all of it confirms that you were never the danger. Their plea is an admission, whether they intended it or not, that the real villain was never you. This is more than a victory. It is proof that truth endures, that integrity cannot be manufactured, and that those who prey on the innocent will ultimately be exposed by the very innocence they sought to destroy. Every desperate effort they make now only cements the reality you've always carried. Your character, your actions, and your essence are untouchable. In their frantic scramble, they inadvertently write your legacy, while theirs crumbles under the weight of exposure. The final lesson is clear and uncompromising. Truth cannot be silenced, innocence cannot be broken, and the guilty will always reveal themselves through their own panic. Your story is proof that what is real cannot be erased, and what is true cannot be hidden. If this revelation hit you as hard as it should, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel and join the family of truth seekers who refuse to be misled. Hit that like button to show you value the power of real insight. Drop a comment to share your thoughts or experiences, and share this video with anyone who needs to see the truth laid bare. Every click, every share, every voice helps expose the lies, elevate the innocent, and shine a light on what others try to hide. Stand with us, because the truth doesn't wait, and neither should you. God bless you.